Have the guys collect them about 10 minutes. All right, they're coming around now. Thank you, sirs. I am going to give you, in 45 minutes to an hour, we'll see how long it takes, the first 3 subjects of evolution's Achilles heels. I cannot cover all 8 in one lecture. There's no way. We're going to just discuss in very brief terms natural selection and whether or not it's the engine of evolution that Charles Darwin required, genetics, and whether or not it actually supports evolution or not, and the origin of life, which is absolutely 100% essential for evolution to work, and yet can it even get off the ground? How well do you think we'll do? Oh, by the way, this is my book. I did write the genetics chapter. I took over the fossil record chapter because Emil Silvestru, our geologist, had a stroke right after he wrote the draft. So that became mine. And then we had to rewrite the radiometric dating chapter 3 times because we wanted people to understand it. So this has been gone through with a fine-tooth comb. And it's not super uber nerdy stuff, but it's high-tech, powerful scientific information that we tried to bring down to a level that everyone can understand it. I only have 3 copies of the book and 2 copies of the DVD on the table because of sales last Sunday at a church in Tacoma. They basically bought everything. So if we run out and you want to get a copy, if you pay for it here, we'll write your name down and we'll ship it to you free with no shipping. Usually our website, we have $5 flat rate shipping. We'll drop that and we'll just get it to you. Because I would hate it if someone said, "Oh, that was awesome, but I can't get the book." Okay? All right, now, I am a marine biologist by training. I have a PhD in coral reef ecology. It was a tough job, tell you what, man. Having to scuba dive for a living. I think I hit about 600 scuba dives while I was in graduate school, and probably 200 or at least 150 of those were at night. It was rough being in Belize and the Bahamas and Florida Keys. But I was studying these beautiful, beautiful animals, and I was looking at their color patterns. And I realized, after doing some chemical extractions, that these colors are caused by proteins. I said, oh, if there's proteins behind them, there's a gene behind it. And I actually ended up in the genetics lab, and I was doing genetic engineering. And when I took the genes from the corals and stuck them in the fish and made bright green and bright red fish, that's when I got my doctorate. Yeah, I made the frankenfish, and that opens up a giant can of worms. Is this moral? Great question. Well, this, I think, yes, because they're fish. They're not people. In fact, we were working on cancer models. We were trying to get the green fluorescent or red fluorescent protein next to a gene that would turn on when the fish got cancer and turn off when the cancer was cured. How's that? Now, is that moral? Oh, boy, this is hard, isn't it? Genetic engineering is puzzling. But because the world is complicated, and because science raises all these questions, we need a guide for our science, and we need a scriptural guide. Where do you think we might find that? Where does the Bible talk about science? Well, how about this? Page 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. This is God talking to Adam and Eve. And he says to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So God put Adam and Eve as stewards of creation. That's what that says. You know what? As their descendants, we would have inherited that responsibility. But to be a steward means you have to be a caretaker. But to take care of something, you have to understand what you're trying to take care of. Does anyone have a pet at home? Do you understand how often your pet needs to eat? You better. We need to understand what we're doing. But the pursuit of understanding is a basic definition of the word science. The role of science in this world is so that we can fulfill our role in God's created order, and while we're doing it, we're learning more about the mind of God, and we're giving glory to God for the things that He has made. Oh, did you know that you should be worshiping while you're doing science? Totally true. But it's not true for everyone. It wasn't true for me for my entire life either. In fact, when I was a young man, I would have said something like, "Oh, come on, you don't believe the Bible. We evolved from monkeys, not Adam and Eve." And if you ask me, what's your evidence of evolution? What's the thing convincing you that evolution is true? I would have shown you this. Pakicetus, the perfect transitional form between land animals and aquatic animals. That was my evidence. That was my proof. I needed nothing else. But I did not know that that cartoon was drawn from those blue bones. I did not know they're about to discover the rest of the skeleton. Had no idea that modern depictions of Pakicetus looks more like a 4-foot rat dog. There are zero transitional features in this animal. The only thing that supports his contention is his ear bones are a little bit more like a whale ear bones than other mammals. Okay, our ear bones are more like monkeys than other mammals, but I don't think we're monkeys. But if you look at the animal, forget the ear bones, there's nothing aquatic about this animal. It is not in any way, shape, or form transitional. You know, we've got more information on this topic than any other time in church history. We should be shouting off the rooftops that the Bible is true and it's actually history. But most people in our culture have never heard a Christian defend the Bible. I live in the Bible Belt, right? The cultural Christianity where I live means everyone's ignorant about what the Bible says. The secularism up here means everyone's ignorant about what the Bible says. It's really not that much of a difference. And it's having an effect on the youth, a very strong effect. Now, I don't know what the actual number is, but here's 4 different surveys that are asking the question, how many young people are going to walk away when they grow up and not come back? That 88%, that came from the Southern Baptist Sunday School Board. Ouch. We took a TV camera to colleges all within about a 2-hour drive of Atlanta, and we interviewed a couple hundred students. Just walking down the street, hey, would you like to take part in our survey, be on camera? And we got a couple hundred of them say yes. And we asked these questions. Did you grow up in church? Were you ever taught anything about creation and evolution? Do you still go to church? What a fascinating series of questions. And what we found was that kids, with only one exception, a student who had never been taught about creation and evolution and still went to church. We found one. Every student who had been taught about creation and evolution was still going to church. So families that discuss this, churches that preach it, the Sunday schools that deal with these very difficult topics were raising people more mature in their faith at younger ages. That's really cool. This documentary we made called Fallout deals with that, and it's actually very fascinating. But science is one thing that a lot of people use today to reject Christianity. Now, this is different. See, I'm 51 years old this year. My generation is the turning point. People older than me, if you ask them if they're not, by the way, it's a great question. Are you a Christian? No? Oh, why not? Let them tell you, and then you know what you have to study. People older than me, they might say something like, oh, the church is full of hypocrites, or the Bible's full of errors. People younger than me, they have no idea what the Bible says, and they've never been to church. So they'll say something like, evolution, billions of years. Very different. And people with more gray than me, there are more of them than us. So if we want to talk to people, we've got to get ready to talk to the majority, which is people younger than us. And they're asking different questions than the culture asked when we were growing up. They're asking questions about science, but the cool thing about science is science actually supports the Bible when you think about it correctly. But we have to split the difference because there's more than one type of science. The type of science you learned in school is called operational science. It deals with observing and testing and repeating things today. And that has led to the development of all of our modern technology, including this nuclear-powered rover that NASA drives around Mars today. It has nothing to do with evolution. It's just figuring out how things work. These thoughts were pioneered by men like Johann Kepler, the great astronomer who discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion. He said of his work it was like thinking God's thoughts after him. But it wasn't just Kepler. Almost all of the early modern scientists believe the Bible. And these are the people who went out and discovered all the scientific laws in the universe. and they thought there should be scientific law because God created the universe and God is the lawgiver. But there are other forms of science. Here's another form. This is what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. Historical science. How many times does history happen? Once. And we don't have time machines, and you can't repeat it. So therefore, the idea of reaching back in time and using science to describe something you didn't see happen is a different type of science. Operational science, how things work. Historical science, the way things were. And this is where the creation-evolution debate is. We're not arguing over the boiling point of water, or the speed of light, or the force of gravity. We're arguing over, did some stumpy-legged fish crawl out of an ocean hundreds of millions of years ago? Or is the earth even hundreds of millions of years old? Those are questions no one was around to see. So we have to stretch back and expand our brains and wrestle with some very difficult things. So let me ask you a very difficult question. Is evolution a fact? And if it's not, how do you disprove it? That second question is harder, isn't it? Well, there's a fallacy a lot of people have. In fact, I've seen this in evolutionary circles a lot. Imagine you have the world of evolution and the world of creation. And what people tend to do is they assemble all these facts that support their theory, and then they say, oh, this means your theory is wrong. Is that a good way of thinking? Because of this. I've seen time and time and time again lists of evolutionary facts that I agree with. So if we want to argue over something, we got to get out of the area where both theories claim the same thing. What do both theories claim? Natural selection, change over time, that I would expect chimpanzees to be genetically more similar to us than a rutabaga, and they are. That's not a surprise. And we've got to get out of what I call the non-discriminating information and get to the outside where we have a question that actually splits the difference between two theories. And we call these evolution's Achilles heels. Because when we started asking those questions, evolution really started struggling. But for a long time, evolution looked like it was winning the debate. Very few Christians are what Very few Christians are what we would now call young earth creationists. Very few theologians for a very long time. And something happened even in the evolutionary circles around 1950. Mathematicians started studying evolution, and they realized they don't have enough time. And then they invented junk DNA. And that lasted for about 20 years, and then we sequenced the human genome. And here's a problem we're having. Our understanding of biological complexity is skyrocketing. If life were really simple, evolution might be able to explain life. That's true. The more complex life becomes, the less likely evolution is. And what we're seeing now, our complexity and Darwin's power to explain it. Okay. Subject 1 of 3. Natural selection. Does natural selection actually happen? Well, first we have to explain what it is. All it is that some organisms have more babies than other organisms. Because some organisms like the environment better than others. And it's not about life and death either. I mean, salmon might die when they spawn, but corals don't. I mean, I've seen a coral as big as a stage and probably as high as a ceiling. One animal, probably as old as the Florida Keys, and every year he spawns. Releases millions of eggs into the water every year. It's not about life and death. It's about who can produce the most offspring. So that's kind of obvious. Some things produce more offspring than others. But it doesn't work as Charles Darwin needed it to work for a couple of reasons. One, most mutations are hidden. If they don't affect the ability of the animal to reproduce, natural selection can't see them. Second, most mutations are weak. Natural selection needs a strong mutation. If you're born without a head, you're not going to have children. Sorry, it's a little gross, but most other things are irrelevant. All of you have mutations. You're carrying mutations your parents didn't have when they were born. And your children will have more mutations than you have. Every generation, we accumulate more and more and more and more. This is not good. It actually spells doom for a species. It's hard to study it, though, because humans live a long time. And we've got lots of genetics for living people and not much DNA of ancient people. So we don't know how mutations happen over time. So we need a laboratory. And a colleague and I, we found the H1N1 influenza virus. It just so happens that we had sequence of this going back to 1918. Someone buried a woman in Alaska in permafrost who had died of the flu. They exhumed her body, took a sample of the tissue, and sequenced the original 1917-1918 flu virus out of her. That virus killed more people than died in World War I. It's kind of like coronavirus. When it first came out, it was super deadly. But over time, I'm hoping coronavirus will do this quickly. The H1N1 attenuated. Actually went extinct in 1957 when another flu came on the scene. I think it was H1N5 maybe, I'm not sure. It went extinct, and then the Russians accidentally re-released it in 1976 from a stored sample, and it came into the world again. It lasted until 2009. Do you remember the 2009 swine flu? Remember how many millions of people died from that? No, it kind of fell out of the news cycle once they realized it was not as scary as they thought. You see, pigs and people can both get the flu because we have the same thing on our cells the flu virus uses to get inside the cell. Same exact thing. The pigs have an independent track going all the way back until about 1917, and humans have a version, pigs have a version. So the pig one jumped into people and spread it out to a bunch of people, and it wasn't very effective. And at the same year, the human one went extinct again. Why? Well, looking at this chart, this is extrapolation. 1917 is down here, and so this 1917 is 0. And this is all of the other sequences we have in all these years, including thousands in this range. And this is how many mutations they carried compared to the 1917 one. Wait a second. The reason I'm talking about this is because of natural selection. The flu is under very strong selection. Only the strongest influenza viruses get passed to the next person, right? So you would expect that natural selection is weeding out all the mutations, and it's not. There's only 3 or 4 amino acids on one particular protein that our immune system can see. And the rest of the genome was just falling apart. And when about 12% of it's about 12% of the genome had mutated, whoosh, went extinct in 2009. The funny thing is that the evolutionists didn't notice. The creationists noticed, and we published this in an evolutionary journal. Natural selection is unable to remove mutations. Therefore, all species are doomed to extinction. Sorry, Mr. Darwin, you kind of missed that one. So, natural selection. The evolution's Achilles heels of natural selection. Most mutations are invisible to selection because they don't affect reproductive output. It cannot actually create anything. It can only remove things. And it's not powerful enough to do what Darwin needs. It can't even keep species alive, let alone evolve them into other species. That's funny. So both sides agree with natural selection, and yet I really agree with natural selection because it's not what the Darwinists think. Oh, but wait a minute, there's mutations, right? Mutations create new variability, and you have to add mutations. Okay, so let's get into the genetics section. Genetics is really fun. I love studying DNA. When I was done with my PhD, I went to the human genome page and hit download. I've got a spare hard drive. I have 1,000 human genomes, actually 2,000 human genomes on that hard drive. On that hard drive, I have an extra set of 800 more human Y-chromosomes. I have 52,000 human mitochondria. In fact, I had my genome sequenced. Black Friday special last Thanksgiving, How much do you think it cost? The first human genome was $3 billion. How much do you think it cost me as a Black Friday special? Someone take a guess. $189. Everything has changed. 5 or 10 years from now, all of you, or unless you're a Luddite, most of you will have your genome sequenced and on file with your doctor. So when your doctor says, oh, we're going to give you X, Y, or Z, let me tell you, oh, no, we're not going to give you that. We'll give you this because this fits your genome profile better. Now, it's not that simple. Genomic medicine is much, much, much more complicated than anyone thought. But it's going to happen, and it's going to be in front of us. The deal with genetics is it's complicated. That little red thing is called DNA polymerase. It's zipping up and down a portion of the genome that doesn't code for protein, and it's making these things called RNAs. You see that one white letter we have highlighted? Notice how it's involved in 6 different transcripts, but they start and stop in a different place? The average letter of the genome is involved in 6 genomic messages. What does that mean? Well, maybe one of these strands affects how well you see in the dark. Maybe one of them deals with how well you tolerate eating garlic. Maybe one of them affects how tall you are. Well, if natural selection is going to kill you for something or affect how many children you have, what's it going to do? Which one is it going to focus on? For selection to work, it needs a very clear signal. But genetics is a very messy signal. That's a massive problem. Another problem. DNA is just about the world's worst information storage mechanism. Why on earth would life have chosen this ridiculous molecule? Every one of your cells has about 1 million of these per day, plus oxidation events on single nucleotides. And your DNA repair enzymes have to fix them. If you didn't have DNA repair enzymes, you would be dead in a matter of hours. How did life start if it didn't have DNA repair enzymes? If you need DNA repair enzymes before you had DNA, how is that even possible? This is a giant chicken and egg problem. More about genetics. Jesus himself said, but from the beginning of creation, by the way, in the beginning is the opening word of the Bible, right? But in the beginning of creation, God made the male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. He's obviously referring to the creation account. In fact, there's 2 direct quotes there from the creation account. But the creation account tells us we started with 1 man and 1 woman. This is a requirement of the Bible. It is not a requirement of evolution. And yet the evolutionists have discovered a woman called Mitochondrial Eve. What's mitochondria? Inside your cells, here's a cell. You have a nucleus, and the nucleus has all your DNA. Outside the nucleus, you've got about 1,000 per cell, these little teeny things. They're called mitochondria. They make energy. They convert sugar into energy. Okay? The waste products is why we're warm. In fact, some people have defective mitochondria that leak too much heat, specifically people who live in Siberia. Oh, that's cool. Anyway, these mitochondria are only inherited from your mother. So you have a direct lineage. You, your mom, your grandma, your great-grandma, your great-great-grandma. Cool. But every once in a while a mutation happens. When a mutation happens, it makes a new branch from the family tree. So all of us have slightly different mitochondria unless we're brother and sister or brother or cousins maybe. But once you get second, third cousins, you have different mitochondria because of mutations. Now I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you a family tree of about 800 mitochondrial sequences. I made this using an evolutionary tree building program. What's your first thought when you see this? Do you see an explosion? That explosion is a signal of a rapidly growing population that started, in this case, with 1 person. Now, where's Eve on this? I don't know. She's somewhere in here. Now, if you look at this, these are African sequences. The Kalahari Bushmen, the pygmies in the central African rainforests, they're way out here. These are Asian sequences, Asian. Most people in Europe are here. My dad's over here, actually. But most people in Europe are here. This is group H. All right. Notice, though, in group H, can you see how some of those branches are longer than others? But these are living people. These sticks, this person here has about this many mutations that no one else in the world has. The length of the stick is proportional to the number of mutations. But wait a second. That means that these people have twice as many mutations as their cousins. They all go back to the same woman. Twice as many mutations in the same amount of time? Have you ever heard of something called a molecular clock? It's the idea that mutations accumulate at the same rate in all populations. This is how they determine where their mitochondrial Eve is. They put her halfway between the most distant on this side and the most distant on this side. It's there. That's the halfway point. That's why they say people came from Africa. Oh, but wait a minute. We know that some people can have twice as many mutations as others in the same amount of time. Therefore, there is no molecular clock. Therefore, you cannot say Eve is there. It doesn't work that way, but that's where it comes from. We're okay with that? All right, I'm going to show you another tree that I did. This took me weeks. This is 800-something Y-chromosome sequences. And this is exciting because after we did the human genome in 2001 or 2003, we only had one human Y chromosome. And literally, until 2 years ago, we had one human Y chromosome. And all of a sudden, we have thousands. You see the explosion? Again, Khoisan Bushmen, pygmies on long branches. Think about it. These small, isolated populations with very small population sizes, they're the ones who are the most extreme. Now, I'm not saying they're more mutated, because the Y chromosome is 60 million letters long. They've got a couple extra mutations, big deal. And most mutations, remember, have hardly any effect. So it's not like I'm saying these guys are mutated and they're whatever. They're just people. This group here, that's most of the Africans. That's 95% of Africa. But wait a second. These are not Africans. This is Greece. There's Bulgaria, Iran, Pakistan, or Palestinian. These are not Africans. These people are not Africans. Genghis Khan from Mongolia belonged to Group C. So wait a second. If these Africans branch off from non-Africans, who branch off from non-Africans, who branch off from non-Africans, that woman, this man right here, didn't live in Africa. The Africans invaded and took over. Oh. Well, we're going to talk a lot about things like that. In fact, I'm talking about the multiple invasions in European history in our genetics talk on Saturday morning. I want to just point out another thing, though. This is most European men. 80% of men in Western Europe. I'm in this group. My Irish great-great-great-grandfather came over to America in the Irish potato famine. Okay, well, most of my Y chromosome brothers live in Western Europe, but some of them live south of Lake Chad in Africa. They have the darkest skin you can possibly imagine. And yet, look at we go back to a recent common ancestor. In fact, this is Native Americans. Way after Native Americans split off from East Asians or West Asians, this is when my group started. So we're going to talk about races this week also. I get to ask the question, if I could be very closely related to the darkest skinned people in the world, and my Irish great-great-grandfather's next-door neighbor might have belonged to this group, what's a race? So not only is DNA fragile, not only do we have too many mutations, not only is there evidence that we go back to one man and one woman, we also find crazy evidence of genetics. Things that are not supposed to be true. You've probably heard way back 10 years or so ago, Mary Schweitzer and her group, they found this material in a Tyrannosaurus rex leg bone. It still stank. It was still rotting. It wasn't actually petrified, which is screaming to me that these things are not millions of years old, because things would rot much quicker than that. But they came back with another study, And they were looking at isolated cells from dinosaur bones. Isolated cells? You mean they haven't broken open and rotted away yet? Well, but there they are. And they stained them with a stain that lit up a little circle. This stain is the stain that stains DNA. I've used it in my own laboratory. Use it a lot. It's called DAPI. Shine fluorescent light on it, it glows bright green. That means there's a nucleus with DNA in it. DNA can't last millions of years. These bones are supposedly 70 million years old. There's no way. Okay? But maybe it's bacterial DNA, because bacteria are living in the ground, and bacteria have DNA. Well, that's what these are. This is our control. They stained another set of cells with a stain for a protein that bacteria don't have. But reptiles have it, and you have it. It's called a histone. It's a protein your DNA wraps around inside your nucleus. And it lit up a little circle that looks like a nucleus. So it looks like there's evidence of intact dinosaur DNA. How come no one sequenced this? Well, one reason is that there were reports of dino DNA back in the 90s, and she was involved in a team that showed that it was a contamination. Apparently someone's eating a ham sandwich in a lab. Other crazy things about DNA. We hear things like caveman and Neanderthal man. Well, these have been brought into the human family. Now, see on the left there, that skeleton? That was in the New York Museum of Natural History. Why are both of his knees bent? Someone wants him to look like an ape. From the hips down, it looks just like you. Now, a little bit different. Which one's longer? I think our upper leg bones are longer than our lower leg bones. They're the opposite. They were stout. The same is true of their arm bones. Someone estimated a female Neanderthal could have beaten Arnold Schwarzenegger in an arm wrestling competition in his prime. Probably a little overstatement, but they were much stronger than we are. The muscle attachment points on their bones are much bigger than ours, which means a bigger muscle. But they also had bigger brains. Oh. We know now, if you just look through the paleoanthropological literature, I know these guys argue with each other, but there are people claiming Neanderthals buried their dead with their heads pointing toward the sunrise, covered in flowers or beads, that they painted in caves, that they made musical instruments out of deer antler on a pentatonic scale, not like our octave scale. It's like Eastern music. They have 5 notes to a scale. That's Neanderthal music too. What? That they searched the landscape for rare minerals and brought them back and ground them up for like cosmetics. What? Everywhere we find Neanderthal remains, we find balls of birch tar. Took us forever to figure out how they made it. They had the controlled use of fire. And they were taking a fire and they'd peel birch bark and make a cone out of it and put it right at the right point in the fire, just the right temperature. First of all, it's going to smell really good when it first boils, and then all the tar is going to boil down into a black goo. And while the rest of the world was tying their spear points to their spear shafts using deer gut, they were using a super glue made out of birch tar. This sounds like people to me. And then entered genetics. You ever see one of those shows where they take a skull, and they put clay on it, and they paint it, and said, "What's that person really look like?" You ever see that? That's cool when they do that. It's amazing. They did that to about a 10-year-old Neanderthal child they found in Gibraltar. Does he look like half a monkey to you? Why does he have green eyes? Freckles, light skin, light hair? Because we know that even though there was color diversity within Neanderthals, a lot of them carried genes that when they're found in modern people, they cause those features. Like some people are estimating that some of the light skin in modern humans came from Neanderthals. In fact, when they first sequenced a Neanderthal, they looked for the mitochondrial DNA, and they sequenced mitochondrial DNA, and that is not found in modern humans. And they said, Neanderthals are not people. And then someone figured out that they could pull the whole genome out of the Neanderthal. Whoops. There's about 60% of the Neanderthal genome sitting in this room. All of you have little bits and pieces of it. In fact, for a long time, we were told that it wasn't in Africa. Well, it didn't surprise me because Neanderthals didn't live in Africa. But a new paper just came out with this, super detailed study. And oh no, Africans do have Neanderthal DNA, just smaller pieces, and they were hidden, but they're in Africa also. Okay, this is very interesting. If we carry their DNA, then according to the biological species concept, we're the same species. In fact, if we carry 3%, all of you on average carry about 3% Neanderthal DNA. That doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that for every 100 of your ancestors, 3 of them were a Neanderthal. Oh. And then we look and we find all this evidence of multiple times that modern people and Neanderthal had babies together. Why? Because they're humans. Now, who are what is this group of people? They're the first group of people that got up to Europe and Western Asia after Noah's flood. They got killed or chased out of Europe by the Ice Age. They met other people who had farms, therefore lots of food, lots of children, and, things happen. Birds and bees, all that. And here we have their DNA amongst us today. More crazy stuff about genetics. Each of these parents is of mixed race ancestry. They have a European mother and an African father. Actually, they're Jamaican. They don't even consider themselves European. They're just all Jamaicans. So each of the parents carries all the genes for dark skin and light skin, dark features and light features. Notice how the one little girl is darker than her parents. She got all the color genes from both grandfathers. Notice the other girl is lighter than her parents. She got all the color genes from the grandmothers. Got black and white twins in one generation. You know what this is? This is our model of Adam and Eve. All we have to do is God to pre-program into Adam and Eve, honestly, a little bit of genetic diversity. Not a lot. And especially after the flood, when people separate into little groups, each little group at the Tower of Babel, each little group is going to have all the DNA of the entire population, and boom, we have a recipe for people looking different. So we summarize the genetics section. Genetics is too complicated. There are too many mutations. When you look at the mutation rate and you apply it to those explosion trees I showed you, just based on a normal mutation rate, mitochondrial Eve and Y-Chromosome Adam were only a few thousand years ago. That was a surprise for the evolutionary community, a big surprise. It fits the Bible beautifully. Now, evolutionists say, that's because we went through a population bottleneck in Africa, and most of the family tree got pruned away, and eventually only one Y and one mitochondrial ancestor appeared there. Okay, they can explain it that way if they want to, but it's not in anyone's prediction. It was a post hoc explanation. After they saw it, they said, what do we do? Bottleneck. That's where the African bottleneck comes from. The fact that there's only one man and one female. All right, let me take a little bit of time to talk about the origin of life. This is an how do you say that? This is a big problem for the evolutionists. Darwin said, to speculate about the origin of life, you might as well speculate about the origin of matter. Darwin, it's called the Big Bang. They're speculating about the origin of matter today. And they've been speculating about the origin of life for a long time. But here's the deal. All they have is random chemistry. Random chemistry, like random blots of ink on a page. Do you think random blots of ink will ever form information? Does that say anything? Does it tell you anything? No. Because information only comes from a mind. Worse, all life depends upon this little engine. All of it. This is the ATP synthase engine. It's actually the world's smallest electric motor. You have billions of these, maybe trillions of these in your body. You make your weight of a specific thing every single day. We'll show you that thing in a second. But it uses, instead of electrons, it uses protons to turn this motor. And it takes these two impossible molecules. One's called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which is never found free in nature. It's too reactive. It self-destructs almost instantly. and it bonds it to another molecule called phosphate, which is extremely rare in nature, because anytime phosphate runs into a metal, they stick together to make an insoluble salt. It falls right out of the environment, which is why on your fertilizer bags, one of those numbers is the phosphorus, because phosphorus is really hard to get in the natural world. So it takes these two improbable molecules, and it makes an even more improbable molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But here's the problem. That machine is made of proteins. Oh. Those proteins are coded in DNA, and the DNA has to go to RNA to make a protein. But every step here requires ATP. So what came first? The DNA, the ability to transcribe it into RNA, the ability to translate it into protein, or the proteins that every single step of the way here requires ATP. That's a three-way chicken and egg problem. And that's the simplest one that I could find. There's tons more, and they're even more complicated. Other problems about the origin of life. There's just stuff in the cell. In fact, we're watching this microtubule form magically. It's actually assembled. But there are things in the cell that are rather surprising. You have these. You have lots and lots and lots of these. They're walking. In fact, they're delivering material. That bag is filled with stuff that's being delivered to someplace else in the cell. It actually might be inside out, so when it hits the cell membrane, it'll unfold and whoop. You want to see that again? It'll unfold and become the outside. These things walk from here all the way down your nerves, all the way to your big toe. And they might deliver neurotransmitters. So when you stub your big toe, oh man, it hurts. That's because that carried a neurotransmitter down to your toe. And it might be that other ones assemble these things at the end and throw a whole bunch of them on their back and walk back again. That's complicated, isn't it? Well, let's look at simple life. Let's just look at bacterium. A lot of bacteria have tails. We call them flagella. This is how the flagella looks. You have all these proteins and all these other proteins. They're exact copies of each other, but they make rings and then more of it. Oh, that's really cool. And then you get this other thing that comes up in the middle. This is how the cell assembles these things. They anchor it so it can't go anywhere. And then it grows. But it grows from the inside out. Those things are coming up on the inside of the tube and forming. Kick that out because now we have an angle. We change something else. We change something else and add some more proteins. And then, here we go. Dun, 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 dun. We have a new thing coming up. And now, let's grow a tail. Well, when are we going to grow the tail? First, we get this walkie thing. But yeah, now we're growing the tail. And that thing that looks like a starfish that's moving its legs back and forth. This is how this protein system works. It grows from the inside out and grows a very, very long tail. Notice it's already turning. It's already working while it's being assembled from the inside out. How did that evolve? This is a super complex system. And if any one of these things fails, the whole thing fails. So why would it ever start doing this if it could never finish it? Because it's not any good to the bacterium until it's like this long. Before that, it would be a complete waste of energy to assemble things like this, and yet there it is. Let's look at how proteins are formed. Going back to the ATPase question, there's a piece of DNA. This DNA has a code in it. There's 4 different rungs, A, C, G, and T. There's 4 letters in your linear DNA alphabet. Oh, there goes a polymerase again. This time it's a little different, though. This polymerase, we're just showing it magically sucking in nucleotides from the front. It's a lot more complicated than that. This is more complicated, too, but we're trying to make it simple. And the nucleotides are lined up to match up with one strand of the DNA. This new thing is called RNA. But RNA is very chemically sensitive. It's very unstable. So we got to work on it really quickly. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 3 letters at a time. We're going to have each of the 3 letters in the strand code for one amino acid in the protein. We use these purple, we call them purple, we colored them purple. These are transfer RNAs. At the bottom, there's a 3-letter code. On the top, there's one of 20 different amino acids. And if this thing makes a mistake, it'll actually back up and fix it and go forward again. It does this. On the top, you see the amino acids are popping off to make a strand of protein. This is happening inside you right now. Billions of times over, constantly. But most proteins will form into a blob. They need help getting folded properly. So these other proteins called chaperones, they grab onto it and they keep it from folding. And they bring it to another protein, a complex of proteins, called a chaperonin. We don't know how the chaperonin works. But we know the protein goes in one end, and it closes up and folds it, and the protein comes out the other end. Oh, by the way, every step you're seeing is Nobel Prizes, PhD dissertations. Millions of dollars of research went into figuring these things out over decades. And all of a sudden, we have a 3-dimensional, 20-letter alphabet that started from a 1-dimensional, 4-letter alphabet. And the chemistry of A, C, and G and T has nothing to do with the chemistry of that protein. We just translated from one language into another. How did life know how to do that in the very beginning? Because without this system, you can't have life. You have to be able to make proteins, and you have to have an information storage system for the proteins. Worse, this requires ATP. You can't even get life off the ground. Look at Psalm 92:4. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your work. At the works of your hands I sing for joy. The more I study biology, my mouth hangs open constantly. This is crazy and amazing, and my God made it. And yet a lot of people are still looking at all this complexity, and they're shaking their head, saying, nope, Gaia. The universe is a consciousness, and so things just spontaneously pop up because the universe wills them into existence, sort of. Oh, no. Emergent complexity. There's complexity woven into the fabric of the universe. And so complex structures naturally pop out of the universe from nothing. Doesn't sound very scientific to me. Or maybe this happened. Rather than being faced with the God of the Bible, many people turn to what's called panspermia. But this is called intelligent design. And it doesn't even work because you can always ask the question, okay, who made the alien? Oh, a prior alien to that? Great. Who made that one? Because you're up against the Big Bang. They only have 13 billion years. That's not a lot of time for an evolutionist. You can't have an infinite regression of living things because you're up against a wall. So the origin of life, the evolution's Achilles heels for the origin of life, there is no source of complex organic molecules. We don't make them. You can have your warm little pond, you can have your milliurie experiment with the gases in the spark chamber that they did in the 50s. You don't get the molecules we need. I didn't even talk about polymerization. If you're making a protein at random, because if you throw in a bunch of amino acids in a jar, some of them will stick together. This is true. Like 1 out of 1 billion, something like that. You might find 3 stuck together. You'll probably never find 4, you'll never find 5. Why? Because as they stick together, water comes in there and breaks the bond. Water dissolves the bond faster than the bonds can form. It's true in proteins, it's true in nucleic acids, and it's true in starches. And yet, life requires really long molecules. We don't get them in chemistry. And besides that, who cares? I would give the evolutionists billions of years. Have all the time you want. Take 1 trillion years if you want. I'll give them all the chemical reactions they want. Whatever warm little pond, you got it. I'll even give them the ability to string amino acids and proteins and sugars together. You got it. I'll even give them the ability to randomly make nuclear membranes or cellular membranes that can randomly capture all the stuff in there. So all the parts of the cell are ready to go. And now why do I say that I'll give that to them? Because they can't get instruction sets. Life is information. Not only does it require information, it is information. It's packed full of information. And during reproduction, that information is copied and passed to the next generation. Randomness is the opposite of information. And random chemical reactions cannot produce what life requires. So they can't even get started. What Jesus told Nicodemus in John chapter 3. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? Tell you what, I see a very strong attack on the Bible coming from our culture based on the earthly things. That's the science and history that everyone thinks is wrong in the Bible. And yet, with what I just showed you, clearly the science is not wrong. I even talk about history. But what happens is, a person who rejects the scriptures on those bases, when they look at the heavenly things in the Bible, they tend to say, you know what, those old guys who wrote the Bible didn't know what they were talking about and talking about science and history. I bet they made the rest of it up too. And the heavenly baby gets thrown out with the earthly bathwater. That's a formula we've seen many, many times. Do you like that? Is that okay? He's sitting there very quietly. I didn't get lots of hallelujahs and amens and things, but I see lots of deer in the headlights looks. But that's okay because we just approached the Creator God, and our understanding of Him is limited, and the more we peek behind the curtain, the more our eyes open up with wonder about what we're finding. I love being a scientist. It is a joy to study God's creation. If you want more information, because I'm going to have a Q&A, maybe 20 minutes worth, maybe, and I'm gone from your lives forever. So my job is to point you in a direction. I talked about our website. I talked about our email newsletter. If you want a suggestion, the first thing I'm going to recommend before anything else is Creation Magazine. I know some people in this room get it already. Thank you. But Creation Magazine, I think this is what God brought me into Christianity with, or at least kept me in as I was hanging by a thread. A lot of what I talked about has been presented in Creation Magazine. In fact, most of what I talked about, I learned in Creation Magazine. I had a few little things in there, but those things I've written about, and I have articles on our website and in our magazine. If you'd like to get this, we have to mail it to you. So we're going to have the sign-up form. We're going to pass it around here in a minute. It's really easy. Check 1 year or 2 year. And then, fill in your address so we can get it mailed to you. But also include your email address because we're going to send you an email every time we come out with the magazine. Bring it out 4 times a year. And we send out an email that says, click here to read the magazine. Well, it's not necessarily for you. It's so you can share it with other people. Share it with whoever you want. We want other people to read it because as an information ministry, we want to get the word out. And you know what? You know more people than we do. And so please share it. We'll also sign you up for our prayer news and our science updates. Basically, once a month, we send out a snail mail, believe it or not. We still do snail mail, and it's still effective. And we do it because we're trying all different ways to reach people. Every way you can imagine, we're still doing some of the old-fashioned ways because they still work. Now, you know the infomercial, but wait, there's more. You know that? No, of course. If you sign up for a 2-year subscription, you will receive everything I told you. Oh, plus, your subscription starts today. I have them on the table, though. We start it today. I'm going to give you a copy of Darwin, the Voyage That Shook the World. We spent about $1 million on this. This is a 1-hour TV-style documentary on the life of Charles Darwin. I'm very proud of this. We worked really hard on this. It was a good production. If you want to understand evolution, you got to understand the guy who started it. And he's a fascinating and very interesting person in history, and he's not what you expect. I'm also going to include that documentary I talked about earlier, Fallout. It's 35 minutes long, really quirky, really fun, And I tell you what, some of those students, what they say is profound. Both of the ones who rejected Christ and the ones who held on to Christ. Really, really interesting material there. This is what the sign-up form looks like. Some of you might be seeing it again or seeing it already. It's easy. But notice there's a checkbox there. That's in case you want to give a gift subscription. Turn over the form. You'll see some addresses on the back. A lot of people like to give things to their kids or their grandkids. It happens all the time, so that's why we made that available. All right, you can finish passing those out if you haven't started yet. I see people working on it. They're going to come to you probably doing the Q&A because I'm going to be done pretty soon. If you're new to this and you don't know where to start, take a look at that red book, the Creation Answers book. That's going to answer 95% of the questions, actually 99% of the questions. That's why we wrote the book. We actually answer the top 60 questions that we get. So what about carbon dating? What about dinosaurs? What about starlight and time? And all those sorts of questions, plus basic Bible questions. We have this really cool thing called the Starter Pack. It comes with the Creation Answer book, the #1 best-selling creation evolution book ever written, Refuting Evolution. It actually uses 8th grade science to rebut a list of evidences for evolution the National Academy of Sciences put together. That's powerful. It also comes with a DVD. Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the documentary. Name your poison. Pick one. Do you like to read or do you like emotion? Because in a movie, you can make emotion. And we worked hard on this. You'll notice as there's 8 sections. Each section is a little shorter than one before. The music is a little faster, and the people's interviews are shorter. So the pace picks up and picks up and picks up and picks up. And at the end, what do? We share the gospel. The whole point of creation is not to satisfy us as nerds. It's to give us a platform for explaining Jesus Christ to people. If we're not talking about Christ, we're wasting our time. We might as well be Muslims who also believe in creation. This is about the gospel, and this is why these things are important. It's so that when you get the evolutionary question, what do I do? Oh, I can answer that. The problem is it takes practice. If you like genetics, look at Mitochondrial Eve and the 3 Daughters of Noah. Terrible title. Oh well. Basically, I am trying as a geneticist to explain that modern genetics has discovered Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel. And it's in the human genome. Here's another one. Probably my favorite talk I've ever given, ever. It's called The High-Tech Cell. I am trying to explain how the human genome works, but no one understands it because it's too complicated. Forget junk DNA, man. That's a stone age of genetics. We're in the modern world now. I compare the human genome to a computer, and very quickly it eclipses the ability of any computer human beings have ever made. That's fun. Okay, I'm going to leave you with 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that is in you, but do it with gentleness and respect. Now, I tried to get you to laugh a little bit. Did I mock anybody tonight? Did I call anybody names? No. Those sorts of things don't usually point people toward the kingdom of God. Gentle answers work much better. Sometimes you have to give a firm answer, but usually my firm answer is just my Irish temper flaring up and really I'm being a jerk, and so I have to watch it. We can do this though, right? Okay, let's say a prayer and then we'll do some questions. Father, thank you for the amazing world that you've given to us. Thank you for science and the amazing technologies that we're learning in the cell. Thank you, Father, that when we dig deep enough, we can see that evolution does not address the real questions and that there's tremendous evidences for you and your creation and against secularism and against naturalism. But Lord, we might know some of these things, but most of the people around us don't. Please help us to be brave in talking to other people because we're afraid we're going to get called names or laughed at or our grades might suffer. Lord, it shouldn't be, but it is the way it is. So help us, encourage us, strengthen us because there's a battle being waged around us and we want to participate. Amen. Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
Let's give him a hand for that. So unless he answered all your questions, I'm sure you have one left. So raise your hand up, and I'll bring the microphone along to you so everybody can hear that.
I have some rules for questions. My rules are questions end in question marks. Please no stories or dreams or prophecies. It has happened. Also, please restrict it to scientific questions. If you ask me a doctrinal question, I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to say, great question. You just gave a sermon topic for next Sunday. I am not going to dare to contradict anything that might be preached from this pulpit. I probably agree with everything, but I don't know that, so we're not going there. Fair enough? Okay. Sir.
So on the genome, how do you know of the billions on the genome, which one is it that determines your hair color? Or which one determines your eye color? How do you know on that whole long where it is?
How do you know in the genome which genes do what? This is very difficult. We know how far apart genes are based in fruit flies. You keep a fruit fly with a little wing and a white eye. And you say, oh, wait a minute. They're usually inherited together, but 5% of the time they're not. That means they're 5% closer, they're 95% closer together than most other genes. So you can tell distance based on how often they separate. But that doesn't tell you much. What they do is they sequence a lot of DNA. They say, okay, how many people out there have blue eyes? Okay, all these people have blue eyes, all these people have brown eyes. What's the difference? And all these people have an A at that location, all these people have a G at that location. This is the blue-eyed gene. Except it doesn't work like that. 23andme.com tells me I'm supposed to have blue eyes. I have brown eyes. Eye color is very complicated, and there's multiple genes involved. Skin color is complicated. There's one particular gene that mostly determines skin color in Europeans, but there's other genes also that are involved, maybe 20 or 30 of them. Hair color is complicated also. Height is one of the most heritable things, but there's a whole bunch of genes involved in height, and plus nutrition and exercise. And there's no gene for intelligence. There's no gene for behavior. We cannot reduce human behavior or human looks to a single letter. But there are some things that are very strongly determined, like there's a hereditary blindness. We know what letter change it is. Sickle cell anemia, we know what letter change that is. There are specific things we absolutely know because the few people that have it, they all have it, and they all have that letter, and no one else in the world has it. It's a fun science. Lots of statistics.
Another question back here.
Sir.
So when they first started teaching evolution in schools, back in the 60s, early 70s, didn't they start out with hundreds of thousands of years? What has the progression been of each time they found out wrong, they add a few million, and are they to a billion yet?
Excellent question. The answer, though, is a little more than that. In the 1700s, the European geologists determined the Earth was several million years old. That's what Charles Darwin was operating on. The age of the Earth has continually been expanded, and now we're up to 4.5 billion years or something like that. The problem is that life, like when we look at the earliest rocks that are still around on Earth, there's evidence of living things. So life evolved as soon as the Earth cooled from a molten blob. That's weird. But yeah, there's always range expansion, date expansion. It's been stretching out and stretching out. I think that's basically the answer to the question. They started really hardcore teaching evolution after Sputnik. The evolutionists used that as an excuse to preach science in the schools. We had to teach science, and that science to them was evolution. And that's really when it came in. I'm not sure if I answered it well, but I did my best.
Thank you very much for coming. You did a wonderful job on what you were talking about.
Okay.
But with young Earth versus older Earth, what is some of those things that prove that?
On our website, creation.com, if you type in the search box 101, the first article that comes up is called 101 Evidences for Young Earth. It's by Dr. Don Batten, and it's really interesting. It's a collection of a whole lot of diverse things. Most of the clocks of various types point to a young Earth. Some of the clocks have been used to suggest an old Earth, but the geologists had already decided the Earth was millions and billions of years old before even radiometric dating was invented. Radiometric dating wasn't even practical until after World War II. So 200 years after they decided the Earth was millions of years old, they went and they found these radiometric dating techniques, and they rejected some of them because they don't work right. And the ones that they keep are the ones that suggest that the Earth is old. But we can use radiometric dating to show that the Earth is young. You remember when Mount St. Helens blew up in 1980? Well, the lava cone there is brand new. I mean, as from the scale of the Earth, it's brand new. Well, someone goes and they collect a piece of the lava cone, or the brand new core in the center of it, which obviously was hardened recently. It was lava before, and it dates to several million years old. But it formed in 1980. We've done the same thing with lava flows on Hawaii and in New Zealand. Every time we date something of a known historical age, it dates to several million years. Now, granted, some of those techniques can be many millions of years, and all the ones we've historically dated are only a few million years, but still they're in the same range in detectability. Excuse me. So it's a little awkward that when we use something of a known historical age, it dates millions of years. Second, dinosaur bones have carbon-14. I showed you the soft tissue. I didn't show the carbon-14. I showed you the DNA also. That's two factors saying dinosaur bones aren't millions of years old. But carbon-14, this wood here has carbon-14 in it. Maybe 1 out of every trillion atoms is a carbon-14. Well, the breakdown rate is 5,700 something years. That's a half-life. So let's round it up to 6,000 years. In 6,000 years, 1/2 of the carbon-14 in this lectern will be gone. That gives it a maximum age of about 70 or 80,000 years before there's essentially nothing left. So nothing that's carbon-14 in it can be millions of years old. I mean, in Evolution's Achilles' Heels, we have actually an animation. And Dr. Sarfati says, if the Earth was 100% pure carbon-14, it would completely disintegrate in less than 1 million years. And I actually had to Google that. I said, how many atoms are in the Earth? He told me a number. Okay, I put that in Excel. I hit divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, until I had 1 left. And I said, the half-life of carbon-14, I added it again and again. I added up, and it was less than 1 million years. It was right. So it's impossible for things millions of years to have carbon-14. Dinosaur bones have carbon-14.
Okay.
So there are things supporting a young Earth, just you don't hear them. Sir.
Thank you for teaching us about this. It's very informative, very helpful. I was kind of wondering, what's your thought on, I've heard murmurings of the atheistic scientific community struggling mightily with the fact that their understanding based on science, you can't have, an Earth come from nothing. And they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we explain the origin of life when natural selection, all these things don't? Have you seen any of that kind of creep in where people from the atheistic community have either become Christians or more acceptance with your work and because it's being proven out more?
I absolutely have seen evidence of secular people, even atheistic people, becoming Christians because of the science. In fact, we have a book back there called, oh boy. What's it called? Soft-colored book. I know where it is. The name escapes me, but I'm in there. It's interviews of 30 different PhD scientists. I wish I could remember the name. I could sell any if I can't remember the name. It's interviews with 30 different PhD scientists, and most of them were atheists. Almost all of them were evolutionists at one point in time, and something changed, and probably about half of them was the science that did it. Some of them became creationists before they became Christians because they knew that the science didn't work like that. But then again, other people faced with the same information turned to aliens. So there's a spiritual battle happening here. A lot of people understand it doesn't work the way, because in naturalism, you have nothing to appeal to except random chance. And random chance doesn't produce life. That's just one out of many examples. I didn't even talk about the Big Bang. I could have. That's a whole section of evolution's Achilles heels. Excellent question. Sir.
I need a microphone. You mentioned the word animation, and I think you are aware, and others at the Apologetics Forum have talked about, early on, the skull of the animal that they got from 3 bones. And then they make that into an animal. So along those lines, you mentioned animation. The various different things that you showed with the motors and the walkers and all of that, how do you know that's true? And if you could answer that in a way that a guy that's not the brightest bulb in the socket could relay it to somebody else.
Okay. By the way, I kept saying this thing that walks and transports and this thing and this thing. It's because the name escaped me at the moment. It's called the kinesin. I knew exactly what it was. I just couldn't bring the name up in my head because I didn't have it written in my notes here. Hey, we are blank again. Is that going to work? It'll come up. So they got it. There are various ways we know that these things work. One of the ways is as we run experiments, if we don't come with contradictions, we probably have a pretty good idea that we're barking up the right tree. Second, we can image some of these things now. We have scanning tunneling microscopes. The first thing I saw was a picture of a benzene ring. And it was 6 blobs, and they're right at the right distance, and the atoms are exactly the right size as what chemists predicted in the 1800s. So we know the shape of molecules now. We can also image them in other ways. I mean, Watson and Crick figured out the DNA molecule by crystallizing DNA and bombarding it with X-rays. And the X-rays would scatter. And because they've looked at other crystals that they know what the shape it is, they could tell the scattering pattern, and they said, oh, it must be a double helix based on the reflection pattern of the X-rays. That's some smart people. And every single thing since then has supported this. I mean, there's tons of doubt about evolutionary theory. There's no doubt about biochemistry. We know how things are shaped. We know how they fit together. We know how they work. We can make a prediction. We can make a chemical in a laboratory. No, guessing what you can't even see. You say, okay, this chemical is going to look like this. Now let's go add it over to here, and I know what it's going to do. And boom, it does exactly what you think. So it's one of those sciences that has built upon itself so strongly that there's no even reason to say, oh, this can't be true. This is a conspiracy. It just works in all cases. It's not true of evolution. When you examine evolution, it falls apart. But biochemistry doesn't. And I can't defend it more than that without bringing up examples of minutia to help build and build and build until someone can actually trust it. I can't do more than that.
Okay.
They can image some of the molecules, yeah. In fact, I saw they took IBM took a super cooled plate, cooled with liquid nitrogen, and they took, I think, cesium atoms, and they took the tip of the scanning tunneling microscope, and they dragged them around, and they spelled out in dots, IBM. And then they, with their microscope, and a picture appears on a computer screen. And they're moving atoms around. So, yeah, we got it.
Okay, but we have 3 more questions.
Okay. Sir.
I was wondering, have there been any inroads made to teach creation alongside of evolution in our colleges?
Have there been inroads made to teach creation alongside evolution in our colleges? 0. In fact, they've closed ranks even more than they were before. They don't want people on the debate stage at colleges. If a Christian organization rents their free speech zone for an event with someone like me, there will be protesters and a lot of rude people. People don't like the cognitive dissonance associated with the challenges. But also, if you are in the evolutionary community, it looks like there's no question. Just like the question about biochemistry, the evolutionists are thinking the same thing about creation. Why? Evolution works in all cases. Why would we even bother to look at that? That's ridiculous. What, you're a Neanderthal? What are you, stupid? Go away. You're not even into science. That's how they're thinking. I know that because I was there too. But one reason why we did the Evolution's Achilles Heels project is because it's the area of overlap. All the stuff that they're doing is in our area of overlap, and almost all of it, both sides accept it. And so therefore, they're not really challenged with a real challenge to evolution until we ask the questions they can't answer. And they tend not to even want to hear it.
Get another question.
Sir?
Well, forgive me if I don't get my nomenclature right here.
Okay.
One of the examples that you showed on the screen showed this protein being formed, and if I'm correct, the RNA which went to make up this protein was folded in a certain way so that it would manufacture this specific protein.
Yes?
How is it that the cell or the RNA knows how to fold itself so that it makes that specific protein?
There is a massive mathematical problem called protein folding and RNA folding. Because if you have a protein, each amino acid can twist. And when you have so many degrees of freedom, you can't predict how it's going to fold. And they have to use supercomputers to make predictions of how a protein is going to work. And it's a notoriously difficult problem. And what they do is they break it down into, okay, well, here I have these two proteins, these two amino acids follow each other like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And the other time we saw that was in this other protein we know that makes a beta-pleated sheet. So we expect that these are going to form into a flat sheet. But these over here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that makes a barrel. So we think that this is going to be a barrel. And then the thing is, there's a couple in between that this plate and this barrel can twist in all these different directions. Which way do they end up? Oh, it's very hard. And so we do know the structure of a lot of things, and this science is advancing so much. We get Science Magazine and the Science Journal in our office, and every week there's a new thing that worked out in the protein structure or the chemical structure of something. It's all these intricate folding diagrams, and this goes this, and it turns around like this, and it does that. It's really amazing and cool. So what they do is they predict it, and then they start working on it. Then they might bombard it with x-rays, and then they'll do something else until they finally say, okay, we know, or at least we believe this is how it works. It's hard, because science is hard, and it's amazing. And once you do that, if you can keep on making predictions, and the predictions keep on working, it's an indication you're right in the first place. So that's...
Okay, we have two more questions,
Okay.
and then we'll wrap it up and let you personally ask them later on.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
I've been exposed to some of this through a major cellular class that I took just for the fun of it. But one of the things I don't understand that you're bringing forth is, I understand the complexity.
Okay.
And I just go back to your tree and the billions of people and how, the Africans are over here. The thing that I don't understand is how social science really tries to simplify, move away from the complexity of our behaviors. So at what point, when you look at this and it shows the complexity of where people would be on this particular tree, and then trying to factor in the different cultural behaviors and norms, try to explain that, because science will tell you, social science will say, well, this is a prediction A, so this is going to happen within this group. It just seems like if evolution is going to take the stance, they do have to explain the different cultural differences, et cetera, over thousands of years. Why wouldn't it be more similar over thousands of years versus over a shorter amount of time?
There's a very difficult joining between the social sciences and the hard biological sciences. There aren't any genes where you can look at it and say, oh, this predicts a behavior. They simply do not exist because we are very complicated people. So usually, the biologists, if they're talking about these things, they're talking very general terms, evolutionary terms, without actually knowing any genes involved. This is an evolutionary stable strategy that helped these people survive or help them have extra children in this time frame, and therefore people today are behaving like this because of our evolutionary ancestry. And there's been some biologists who are trying to justify rape because it's evolutionary. I mean, it just happens. Males dominate females and they leave babies behind, and that's why we have rape, because if you do it often enough, guess what? You have a lot of babies, and they win. I mean, the guys win. So it's an awkward, and they don't fit. And one of the coolest things, and things that makes me happy about genetics, is now not opening up the free will versus predestination argument. I'm not doing that, but there's no such thing as genetic predestination. I mean, skin color, yes. You and I have very different skin colors. That's programmed by a couple of genes. Height, little bit. Intelligence, not really. And behavior, no. Except in a few very rare cases where someone might be missing something like a serotonin receptor because it's broken, and that might be a homicidal maniac sort of, but that is so incredibly rare that it's not even worth talking about because it doesn't describe society at large. And this is an important thing because this goes way back. I mean, you've probably heard of the Scopes monkey trial, 1925. Well, Clarence Darrow, who ran that, had just come off of the trial of the century. Leopold and Loeb, the two rich kids in Chicago that murdered their neighbor for the fun of it. And do you know what his defense was? The very opening part of the trial, Your Honor, my clients would like to plead guilty. What? They're going to hang. And then at this point, the jury goes away. And it's just the defense attorney and the judge, and he gives his closing comments. The prosecuting attorney had nothing to say. He spent 3 days giving his closing statement. It became a textbook used in law schools all over America for 50 years. Do you know what he said to the judge? Essentially, my clients couldn't help it. They're just a product of the revolutionary heritage.
Okay, let's take the last question here.
Sir.
I've heard a lot about the Neanderthals, but you seem to know a lot about them. Who exactly were they, and why were they so special?
All right. Who are Neanderthals, and why were they special? They're the first group of people who made it up into Europe and Asia after Noah's flood. They lived in miserable conditions. It was cold and wet and ugh. They'd never figured out farming because it probably wasn't the place you could have farms. But Eskimos didn't have farms either. And they seemed to do just fine. Neanderthals were smart. They adapted to their environment. They did really well, sort of. They never attained a large population size. As far as we can tell, there's some estimates that there might have been 5,000 Neanderthals from Spain to central Siberia, or actually eastern Siberia. From like a 3,000-mile range, there might have been 5,000 of them. That's a very small population. In fact, looking at them, they're shockingly inbred. When you look at their genomes, you can tell, wow, this person's dad married his niece, or things like that, and they're so inbred, it's actually shocking. But that's what happens when you get isolated from everybody. You only have a couple people here and a couple of people there and a couple people there. You marry your sister. There's no one else around. And it causes genetic destruction. They had a very high mutation load. Some of the diseases modern people carry, they see them in Neanderthals. Oh, we got it from Neanderthals. They were on their way out. They were breeding themselves out of existence. But then as the climate warmed, modern people moved in, and they had more people, and they met with the Neanderthals, and there's probably a lot of bloodshed, because that's typically what happens in ancient history. People kill each other like crazy, but not always. And we had half Neanderthal, half modern humans left behind. But the crazy thing about Neanderthals is the earliest Neanderthals didn't look like Neanderthal. We call them Homo heidelbergensis, or modern man. There's a cave in Spain, Cima de la Oasis, I forget how to pronounce it. I'll do it tomorrow night. I'll have it written down. They found like 31 individuals, and they're looking at them saying, these look like the ancestors of Neanderthals. And genetically, they are the ancestors of Neanderthals. Neanderthals didn't turn into Neanderthals until the last Neanderthals. The classic Neanderthal shape is the last ones alive. Because they were so inbred, they became a distinctive, if you like, racial group. I mean, if everyone else in the world died and only us survived, and only our descendants would ever be in the world, you know what? There's a couple people with African American or Indian ancestry in this room. Their looks would disappear because they'd be overwhelmed by the genes of all the people of European descent in this room. We'd have a whole bunch of white people, maybe even everyone would have blue eyes, who knows? There's a lot of blonde-haired people in this room. I can't tell half of you because you got gray hair, but it's only the genes of this population would remake the Earth's population. It wouldn't look the same. In fact, the amount of inbreeding would be really bad. We'd probably go extinct. But how many kids could we have? 20 kids in the next generation, maybe? And they're all going to marry each other, and they're going to marry each other, and maybe we very quickly become very distinctive.
Okay.
I don't want to stop. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. But
Thank you all very much.
Yeah. Let's thank him.